And coming up before 8 o'clock, how modern-day slavers have been exploiting the pandemic to exploit victims.
In fact, let's talk about that right now. More than 500 people in Scotland rescued from modern slavery last year. And it's feared more will be exploited because of the pandemic, according to pressure group Scotland Against Modern Slavery. The issue is being highlighted against what is Anti-Slavery Day. That comes on Sunday. Let's speak to Shan, who runs Scotland Against Modern Slavery. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
512 people identified as victims last year. What sort of situations were they found in?
There's a variety of situations, sadly, to say. I mean, if you look at the stats themselves show that 305 of the victims were caught in what we call modern slavery. So that is labour exploitation of some shape or form. Sexual exploitations in there, domestic servitude as well. That's when somebody's forced, as you could probably guess, forced to work in somebody's house or property for very little or no pay, and they're trapped. And these situations have just, in my opinion, or our opinion, that people don't seem to recognise this as a bigger issue.
Do you think that we're slightly in denial about the prospect of this actually happening in Scotland?
I think there's maybe not just denial, but I just think a lack of awareness, and that's what we aim to do at Scotland Against Modern Slavery, is raise awareness. People don't see it, and that's the point about these victims. They're unseen, and the campaign, I suppose, is about making people aware of what the signs are, how to spot the signs. It can slip in anywhere, and I think if we look at some of the press this year, at the Boohoo example of the supply chain of Boohoo in Leicestershire, it was happening right under the noses of a population of a city, that's similar sizes to Glasgow, for example, in Leicester. So it's happening.
And you're concerned that the nature of it might be changing somewhat because of COVID?
Yes, I think so. Well, not I think so. There's evidence to suggest that is happening. If I give you a little example, if you look at the rise in numbers in 2019 versus the year before, there was 220 victims rescued in 2018, 512 in 2019, and the charities and NGOs and the Scottish Government who are doing the work on the ground, it looks like through the COVID epidemic, it's been very similar numbers to those rescued, maybe slightly more in the last few months. And I think it's about labour, unfortunately, and the labour availability, because we have a national living wage, which is fantastic, but sadly, that means that labour is more expensive now than it would have been before the minimum wage was introduced, or before, as it started to increase. So what you're seeing is where there's a cost involved and that cost's gone up, there's more profit to be made through the exploitation. And COVID, alongside Brexit, unfortunately, means that labour is less available. And that sounds a bit of a contradiction as we hit the highest unemployment we've ever had. But in some of the hard-hit sectors, agriculture, production, and some of these, I would say, at that level of role, we haven't seen an increase in Scottish nationals taking those jobs or UK nationals taking those jobs. So we've got a big gap. And where that gap is, that's where the criminality can come in to try and exploit it.
And are we talking about people of all ages here? And we're talking men, women and children too?
Yes, absolutely. This is a crime. This is, a criminal organisation or a group of criminals want to exploit labour. They don't care. They're just looking at a human with pound signs above them, so they don't care age, demographics, sex. It doesn't really matter. If they can make money out of you, that's what they're there to do.
And where are these people who are being exploited mainly coming from?
Actually, it's every local authority in Scotland. That was the latest statistics that I've seen. So it's all over. And people would say, and I would say, I was unaware a number of years ago, and it was only when I took part in a training course. It was a commercial exercise to learn about modern slavery and try and stop it coming into our business. I realised what a problem it was, and I thought, we're not doing enough about this. But it's so I realised, I said to myself, it doesn't happen. I've grown up in Glasgow all my life, no chance. We've got a history of slavery connections 200 years ago, but that's as close as it'll get. But it's happening everywhere. Not one local authority hasn't been touched in Scotland.
And there's concern about particularly people arriving from Vietnam, as I understand it.
Yes, I mean, actually, the highest amount of victims in the UK last year were British. So this is UK nationals that were being exploited. But yes, in Scotland, it was Vietnamese. And sadly, as we see that court case, it's a very sad court case about those poor people that died in that container lorry, we can see if they're coming in, they're being exploited because they're not joining the employment grouping, if that makes sense. They can't become legal workers, so they're going to get exploited.
Because they're not arriving legally, they're under the radar, so that makes them prime candidates for exploitation.
Absolutely right, absolutely prime candidates, and that's what happens, isn't it? And they're whisked away, and they're never to be seen, and they never get onto the employment ladder.
And I presume there are language barriers, etc. So once they appreciate that actually things are not as rosy as maybe the story they were told, then they're trapped.
They don't know any different, and that is one of the key parts of actually becoming a victim. You tend to find there's language barriers, cultural issues as in they don't understand how the PAYE system works in Scotland, language, mental health issues, drug dependency, drink dependency. That's why the victims get picked.
So what would you say to people then ahead of Anti-Slavery Day on Sunday? Because as you say, many of us might believe, we've never experienced this, we've never seen it. What would you say to people to look out for and to do if they're aware of what is going on?
Well, the core of what we do in Scotland Against Modern Slavery is raising awareness in the business community, and this is going to businesses and explaining to them this can happen not just in your factory or in your office, because it's probably unheard of, but it can happen in your supply chain domestically in the UK and in Scotland, not just globally. So ask your suppliers, know your suppliers, make them understand what you're looking for, but try and spot the signs. So very, very clear guidance. Somebody who's looking dishevelled, somebody's looking unwell. It's not just one of the red flags that you're looking for, but are they being lifted and laid at work? Is there a group of them being lifted and laid at work? Is there one person feeding a group of people? Is somebody holding their bank details? Is somebody holding their passport against their will and you just don't know? Are they coming in with injuries into work? And all of these things together paint a picture. Not necessarily one of them means that they're a victim of domestic modern slavery, but if you put them all together and you report it, and you can get them to report it, they have to recognise it. And part of the problem is the victims don't know themselves.
Shan from Scotland Against Modern Slavery, thank you very much.
Should the Old Firm Derby game be free to watch this weekend during the